What if the biggest breakthroughs in your business don't come from solving problems, but by creating them? I know it sounds like madness. After all, leaders are trained to keep things calm, predictable, and running smoothly. But here's a dirty little secret: predictable doesn't drive innovation, safety doesn't spark growth, and playing it safe, well, that's the fastest route to stagnation. And that's what we're talking about today on Marc Haine Live. Welcome to this episode of Marc Haine Live. Of course, this is where small business owners and entrepreneurs develop new skills to help them create the jaw dropping, show stopping experience that their customers and their employees deserve. I am your host, customer and employee experience strategist Marc Haine, and my guest today is author, speaker, and leadership disruptor who turns chaos into breakthroughs, Ted Santos. And today we're going to be diving into why most innovation falls flat and how you can lead your team through intentional disruption to spark very real scalable growth. My one ask is that if you know somebody who could use this information, somebody who's struggling with scaling and getting out of the day-to-day crisis and complacency, then please share a link to this episode. Knowledge is power, but only if we share it. So please make sure you do that. And please make sure you subscribe to this podcast as well. If you're like most business leaders, you've probably spent your career trying to solve problems, put out fires, and keep chaos at bay. But what if that's exactly what's holding you back? What if the real key to performance is causing problems on purpose? I know that sounds risky and maybe even a little reckless, but that brings us to our question of the day. So, how much is your organization losing right now because your team is too focused on solving the wrong problems? I'd love for you to be part of this conversation. Why don't you go ahead, share the link of this episode on your favorite social media platform, hashtag it experience leadership, put your comments down and be part of this conversation. As I mentioned, my guest today is a powerhouse in leadership transformation and one of the boldest minds I've ever come across. He's the creator of the Disruptive Leadership Model, a seasoned executive advisor, and the author of Here's Why You Can't Find Love. He helps leaders intentionally create the kind of challenges that lead to real scalable breakthroughs, not the meh kind that fizzles out in the boardroom. Ted, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Oh, great for having me. I look forward to this conversation. And the way you are phrasing this is so perfect. Asking people to look at business from another perspective. Fantastic.
Yes, it's amazing what happens when you put a different lens on business, isn't it? It's all of a sudden you see things a little with a little bit different clarity.
Well, yeah, you start to see the same world in a way that it never was. Sort of like it was hidden in plain sight. It was always there, and you just never saw it because of the way you were thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, so Ted, before we get too deep into today's topic, could you just tell us a little bit about who your clients are and how you serve them?
Sure. My clients are primarily executives of middle market. And for me, middle market is revenues between 50 million and 500 million. Uh, CEOs primarily, sometimes boards of directors, but generally the top leaders in an organization. I have worked with small businesses, and these are people who are looking to create a breakthrough and not sure how to do it with existing resources. Uh,
I
there
love
there
this.
have there have been the occasional VP who you could sort of see in his eyes he had this hunger for being a president or CEO, and I've worked with people to actually get that job to train and coach them to become a president or CEO.
Right. I mean, just because you're highly skilled in your expertise doesn't make you the perfect leader to lead companies, does it?
Absolutely. There's a story I know of a gentleman, former CEO of a number of well-known companies. And when he left a CEO as a bank, he put the number two guy who was the CFO, put him in charge. He made him the CEO. And in 18 months, the board had to find another CEO because he didn't do well. He was a great number two guy, but he was just never trained and prepared to be the number one guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So today we're talking about this idea of both on both fronts. We have businesses that are constantly just trying to keep crisis at bay. And then we have other organizations that are kind of like just flowing through complacency. It's what we've always
Mm,
done. It's what
yes.
makes us makes us comfortable. What are the differences between the two as far as mindset is concerned, and how are those two mindsets holding people back?
So, first, I would say one of the major signs of a company that's heading for distress is that they're successful and they are very complacent with the success. And that's a, you could say that's a certain mindset. But one of the things that I've seen is there's a mindset of, I'm well educated. I know everything that I need to know through college, and I'm going to grow my organization. And what that person will find is the organization will eventually outgrow them. And they will, so if you're a $5 million company and you grow to 20 million, 20 million will grow beyond what your skills and competencies can manage, and you'll shrink it back down to seven or eight. The company that does well, they have a mindset of pulling more out of their people than their people know how to get out of themselves. And that allows that leader to constantly grow and develop and delegate to people, and their people will grow with them. In the first one where, maybe he's a really smart guy, he handles everything and he doesn't delegate much, the company outgrows him and his people. The person who knows how to pull more out of people is also doing that with themselves. So they're very different mindsets.
And so when we think about these people who kind of flow into this, what level of humility do people need to have in order to turn around and say, I have a problem? Because to a lot of people, they're so ingrained in their business that their whole bubble is, well, this is normal for us. This is normal for my industry. We're in this. This is the same routine. It's nothing will change this because this is the business. How do you shake people out of that?
So no, there
Just a
there
little
is
question, Ted. Just a it's this is just a little problem.
there's a and this can be troubling for a lot of people initially. There's a distinction between thinking and having thoughts. And this really becomes difficult for people who are considered really smart because they think it's a matter of semantics. So having thoughts is not it's thoughting. You're having thoughts about things that you've read, you've heard, you've seen, things that you already know about. Thinking is thinking that which you haven't thought. And the challenge with that, especially if you're smart, is thinking means you're about to face confusion, uncertainty, and possibly severe amounts of chaos. And if you're good and you're smart and you're accustomed to having the right answers and being able to learn stuff quickly and learn things that are related to what you already know, you're good. But once you get over here to thinking and the confusion and the uncertainty, you generally don't have tools to manage that. So the first thing you want to do is get rid of it. And as you were saying at the beginning of the show, that's how you end up stuck in complacency. And that's how you end up with entire industries stuck because they're all pretty much using the same tools. And a perfect example is, why didn't Sony come up with the iPod? They were the masters of the miniature listening devices, but they were successful, they were complacent. Hey, we're going to even make a disc man now, and look at that, and you can carry it on your arm when you're running, and we have these new features and benefits. And then a guy like Steve Jobs, who isn't stuck with that way of thinking, said, can we put 1,000 songs on a listening device? And his people are saying, I think you're high, Steve. What are you talking about? This makes no sense. In fact, we make these computers, ad agencies love them. Our customers are like, fans, and you want us to make listening devices. It makes no sense. However, That was a problem. Once solved, it made the Walkman obsolete.
Hmm. Hmm. I, where does constraint fall into this?
Maybe I'm not sure. I understand what the word constraint means, but perhaps I
So
don't.
when you're thinking about this idea that use Sony and Steve Jobs as examples,
Right,
when somebody's already doing something like Blockbuster
right.
and Netflix comes along, Blockbuster is so firm in their business model that they look at Netflix and go, "You're on crack. You must have been hanging out with Steve Jobs." Uh,
Exactly.
but having said that, when we have constraints holding us like that we have to work within, do we start to think more creatively because of that when we're ready to establish this mindset that nothing is impossible?
Well, let's say that Netflix was actually thinking and Blockbuster was having thoughts about how to do more, better, or different, and Netflix created an entirely new universe by thinking, and that would have had some kind of messy communication. How do we do this? You have to be okay with the messiness of thinking through that which hasn't been thought. And if you're only interested in being good at what you do, you're going to go by way of the horse and buggy.
Mm-hmm. So when we think about this idea of disruptive leadership, disruptive thinking, are there any myths that we need to bust around this? Like when you first come up against people and you start kind of establishing, or even people who are tuning into this show right now, when they're thinking about this, they're like, "What you're talking about sounds like it could be costly, it could be extremely risky." Are there any myths around this that we need to bust?
Maybe almost
Maybe
everything.
all of them, every thought process.
Even thinking that thinking is a process is a myth that needs to be busted.
How so?
Because see, there are mental barriers and roadblocks, blind spots that you have, and you just these are things that you don't even know that you don't know. And I can give you an example. I had a client. He started out as a CPA, worked for one of the largest CPA firm. Smart guy, decided to make a change in his career and went to the mortgage industry. When I met him, he was I think 62 and he was in a rut. Every day he went to work expecting to be fired. And the guy was he was someone that you couldn't not like. There was no way you could not like this guy. Uh, when he walks into the room, he knew how to break the ice and make everyone comfortable. And so he was a master at that. He would get meetings with people he called heavy hitters. These would be investors. He'd sit at the table with them, he'd crack a joke, everyone laugh. He'd talk a little business and then make another joke, and the investors would leave the table with no deal, but they would want to go out and have beers with the guy again. And he couldn't understand why he wasn't closing deals. So he was just waiting to get fired. What we discovered that he didn't know when he was 13, he was in the backseat of a car with a few older guys, 17, 18 years old. And one guy said, "Hey, what's this guy doing with us? He's just a little young guy." He cracks a joke. Everyone laughs. They put their arm around him and says, "You're a cool guy and you belong." So that became his sort of superpower when he wasn't doing well. So people and that was a blind spot. So he used it because it worked, but he had no way to distinguish when it was obsolete, when it was bankrupt. And this is something people have. It's what will derail people. So in that case, we had to get him to unlearn that, not stop doing it. You still can be the icebreaker, but that's not how you close deals. So now we're going to work on strategies and questions in a way to engage your prospects so that you can find out what their needs are and close the deal. So when he hired me in the first 3 months, he doubled his productivity. In the next 3 months, he doubled that. So and three of his competitors started courting him, and he actually went to another company because they made him a better offer. So this was a guy 62. Supposedly, he can't teach old dogs new tricks, and he went from waiting to be fired to being courted by his competitors, and his company would call them into the office and say, "We'll give you whatever resources you need because you're that good." So that's an example of people thinking they just need to do more, better, or different of what they're already doing, and they
Mhm.
can't see that they're digging a hole and it won't get them out of it.
How do people get into a mindset where they can start objectively looking at this? Because most entrepreneurs, most leaders I know are
Mm.
finger pointing
Mm.
because all they see is the symptom of the problem. They don't understand what's at the root of it, but what they see is they see my staff are disengaged. Nobody wants to take a chance. Nobody's innovative. If I'm not telling them what to do, nobody does anything. What needs to happen for a leader? Let's say somebody's tuning into this today. What needs to happen as far as their own personal awareness to make them turn around and go, oh my gosh, I think I need help?
So, in my work, I hate giving answers because that's you asked what's a myth? Having the right answer is one that puts you in a box that's inescapable
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way we're educated. So, just think of baby birds in a nest and their parents come to the nest. The first thing the birds do is open their mouth so they can drop food in. That's the way we're taught to operate in the world. Drop the answer into my brain and I'll know what to do. Tell me what to do or tell me where I can find the answer. And that's still that part of having thoughts. To actually think means that you're more discovering and you're okay with the messiness of not having the right answer. Okay. So I just want to start from there. You asked about myths.
Mm-hmm.
So people, leaders in that situation that you described, there are a number of things that they are going to have to unlearn. Perhaps they're yelling at their people, they're disappointed, they're just telling them what to do. It's almost like you're diminishing. You're not even allowing your people to show their prowess. So a more effective way, and this is giving an answer, a more effective way is to ongoingly ask your people to do things they don't know how to do or things they believe they don't know. As a leader, one of the things you want to do is have sort of an inventory of your people's competencies and capacities. And there are things that are tangential. So maybe they haven't done this specifically, but they've done something that's close to it, and you can pull them out, stretch them in that area. So ask them to do things they don't know how to do. Do not give them the answer. And if they don't get it right or fail, even if you know the answer, don't give them the answer. Ask questions. Be Socrates. Ask them questions that help them discover it on their own. Because what will happen is their brain, there's something called neuroplasticity. Their brain will grow new neural pathways that give them new perspectives and will give them this sort of prowess and pride of being able to accomplish it. The Greeks had it right. We focus so much on wanting to find happiness, but the Greeks had a word called eudaimonia, and eudaimonia is often mistranslated as happiness, but really it's a euphoria that you experience after working through obstacles and difficulties and coming out with an accomplishment. So if you let your people work through that, they will have that experience and they will have some new skills, new competencies. They'll have a different mindset and you'll be able to ask them to do something else they don't know how to do. And eventually they start developing their own way of thinking as opposed to being dependent on you giving them answers. I hope that answers your
Yeah.
question.
So what's interesting about that, because I'm of this a similar mind. All about giving people the opportunity to fail forward.
Mm,
I think personally, I think I've seen organizations that constrain their staff so much within job descriptions that they're not
right,
actually able to tap into the superpower that their individuals have on the team. And
right.
so much so that they will actually judge people by the job description and how well they fulfill that. And because if they have any weaknesses within that job description, oh well, they don't have any strengths outside of that. It's impossible because they can't do the core bit of their job,
Right,
right?
right.
And which I think is really a shame, because part of the components of what we do whenever we interview new team people within our organization is we're looking for that the magic, the people who will bring new magic and new insights and a different way of thinking, and we're excited to bring people on board only to constrain them and muffle them, and it's kind of like the horse with the blinders on, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things often ask people is who do you want to be known as? Like,
Mm,
what do you want to master? If you were known as a master of some universe, what would that mastery be? What would that universe be? And people have to often think. Sometimes they don't have an answer. They say, "Let me get back to you tomorrow." Uh, but people get to think about who they want to be known as opposed to a job description, and that opens up a whole new world of possibility.
hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting because when they say it starts at the top, it really does. It starts from that leadership, right? How the leader feels about certain things translates then into how the frontline managers feel about things. That in turn is will affect the frontline service component. It'll affect engagement, attrition, the whole waft, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So I once did a CEO. I did used to do these CEO roundtables with middle market CEOs, and then I'd invite former or current CEOs of Fortune 500s. And I had a Fortune 500 CEO. He was fairly young at the time, late 40s, and he said he was really good at turning around companies and driving revenues. And he was dropped into a company that was distressed, and he fired a bunch of people and brought in his own people because he knew part of the mission was to transform the culture. And bringing in his own people didn't get the job done. So then he hired an outsider and said, "Fix my people. They need to be transformed." And they went to work and it wasn't working the way they anticipated. So one of the executives in the outside company said, "Do you mind if I make a suggestion? How about we transform you first?" Oh no, that's it's just, you see where I am? I'm a CEO. Just trust me on this. You know what? I'll do it. And he transformed and he watched the rest of the organization transform right with him. He said the valuable lesson was whenever he was brought into an organization that he knew he had to transform first, and then it would be a lot easier to get the rest of the organization to move with him. I mean, the people see the kind of commitment that he is to this transformation. It's not just lip service. Like,
Yeah.
I'm fully committed to transformation. I'm going to eat my own cooking here.
I love that. And again, the humility it takes to come to that decision is huge, because a lot of people, to your point, they have they have their corner office, they have their reputation set on it, and the problem can't be me because look where I'm sitting.
Right.
It can't possibly be me, right? And yet time and time and time again, we're seeing it in the throes of that it's not only in the upper management, but it's in the frontline management attitudes as
Oh,
well.
sure,
Because you know
sure.
what? That becomes part of the culture, doesn't it? That if when you're in this leadership role, you have to respect me because I'm the manager.
Yeah, I heard you in one of your other podcasts talk about a supervisor who said, if you don't do things this way, you don't belong here. You don't won't make it. It was really kind of a crude and brutal way to
Yeah.
speak to someone. You said you really wanted to go over to the guy and say, "I can help you," but you didn't think that was the right thing to do.
Well, going up to a leader and saying, "Hey, do you know that you really suck as a leader? Can I help you? I
Right,
really."
right, right.
So it begs the question, how do these, and I'm hoping that this is part of the mission of this podcast, right? I'm hoping that people will tap into this and go, "Oh my goodness, it's like they're talking to me." And I need to show a little more humility. I need to know that my poop doesn't, I'm walking around thinking my poop doesn't stink, and I have to realize I'm a human being in a role. I have fallacies, or I have quirks, and I have biases, and I need help. Right. And
I,
that's only at
right.
that point can somebody turn around and then come to you and ask for help to actually make that transformational change.
Well, one of the challenges when you start talking about transformation and navigating through chaos and intentionally creating problems we are educated, as I said, to look for answers or the easy one, two, three steps.
Right.
And this is such an abstract conversation that it really requires you to take a step back and think. Uh, so one of the big challenges, especially if you're in that C-suite, is that you created an entire identity around your title. And once you have this identity that's seen as the top of the food chain in society, it's like it's infallible. You How could you say anything? Do you see my title?
Hmm.
And so I would say one of the things, and people often say, oh, Steve Jobs was different. He had something special. I'm going to assert that, and I never spoke to Steve Jobs, but I'm going to assert that what he did was he was able to unlearn his identity and not be stuck with it. And so what would he would be more left with, more empowering is this is what I stand for. This is what I'm committed to. And that becomes his true north as opposed to the identity that's really fixed because you can stand for one thing today and once it's fulfilled you create a new stand that becomes this platform for people to join you. So I stand for this listening device for with 1,000 songs. iPod done. Okay, now I'm standing for that iPod being a cell phone. How do we do that, Steve? Well, that's what we're standing for. And I'm committed that, we have the best. You get what I'm saying? As
Yeah.
opposed to saying, I'm the leader, you do what I say. Uh, and so people will say, well, how do I unlearn this identity? How do I get out of that? And it's not like you read a book and it has the 3 steps that you get out of it. It's more like Navy SEAL training. So if you ask me for the 3 steps to become a Navy SEAL, you're asking the wrong question. It requires training. It requires a mindset shift. It requires unlearning. And it requires going through these conversations that could make you uncomfortable, but what's wrong with being uncomfortable? But also being able to deal with your own disruption to your own identity and way of seeing the world gives you the wherewithal and the mindset to be nimble enough to navigate yourself and others through chaos and disruption. If you can't navigate yourself, it becomes extremely difficult to navigate others who think this is a crazy idea or I'm stuck, I'm disrupted, I don't want to do this. If you can't navigate yourself, how will you be able to guide and help those people?
I love that. When we come back, I'd like to start looking at the strategies and the steps that we can take to create more intentional chaos that's
Okay,
focused on the right thing. And we'll get to
sure.
that right after this.
When the spotlight shines on your business, are customers applauding or yawning? In other words, how is your business performing? Make your business a star with the new book, Lights, Camera, Action, Business Operational Excellence Through the Lens of Live Theater by Marc Haine. Marc uses his business and acting experience to help you see your business like a live show so you can create a performance your customers will never forget. Buy Lights, Camera, Action today at your favorite online retailer or directly at marchaine.com.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with the fabulous Ted Santos. Ted, you just saw the ad for my book. Tell us a little bit about your book. What's it all about?
Sure. I wrote the book because we have a divorce rate that's over 50%. And I'll ask you a question. Uh, Corporate America is losing it's losing $300 billion every year in workplace productivity. Do you know why?
No, I do not.
One word.
Relationships?
Yes, divorce, bad relationships and divorce. So when people go through divorce, their workplace performance drops by 50 to 75%. So when we are saying employees are not engaged, of course they're not. You have a big percentage of your employee population either headed for divorce in the middle of one or just coming out of one, or a bad relationship that never made it to marriage. And they are distracted from that, so they're not producing that. So that's $300 billion to corporate America Another $30 billion goes to the taxpayer because uh, those broken homes create criminals. Social services are needed. There are all kinds of problems that happen that the taxpayer covers. So I wrote a book that takes my transformation methodology and I infuse that into something that people can relate to, which is intimate relationships. So I made it a dynamic conversation. There are 5 women in the book, so it's almost like a workshop. So there are 5 women engaging me. "Hey, Ted, what do you mean? You're a guy. How could you say that?" So we're sort of thinking through and going through this conversation about relationships and what derails them and what's a more effective way to create a relationship.
I
And
love that.
and the punchline to the book is love doesn't create a great relationship. Love is a byproduct of a great relationship. So if you haven't developed the competencies to create a great relationship, I hate to say it, what makes you think you deserve love?
So good, so good. And that's kind of sort of also the metaphor for being a leader, because we are in a more relational workplace culture nowadays, right? We're no longer, I remember we had a challenge with a CEO, and he would walk into the building every day, past security, go up the escalator, go directly to his office. He hasn't talked to anybody as he walked in. And so he was so separated from the culture of the place that he
Right.
didn't have a clue about the personalities who worked for him. He didn't have a clue about any aspect of it, because at the end of the day, he showed he didn't care about them. And
Yes.
so, for environments like this, how do we shake up that? How do we start shaking up the fact that in order to get disruptive at any particular point, we have to be focusing on the kinds of relationships that we have, because we need to build trust. We have to have a proof of trustworthiness. And then what you mentioned earlier, this idea of competency and capacity.
Absolutely. So care is really important. I mean, if you think about it, if you're going to intentionally create problems for your people to solve, that suggests you're going to make them uncomfortable. You're going to ask them to do things they don't know how to do. And if you're just going to keep status quo, that's a way to care about your people. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want my people to feel uncomfortable. Uh, and what you'll eventually do is have an organization that's obsolete and everyone will be out of a job. But if you want to be a leader in the industry, you have to care enough to understand who your people are and what their competencies are, what they're capable of, and not be afraid to pull more out of them. So it's really more of a care. You're bigger than you know you are. So I'm gonna pull more out of you so that you get to see the bigness that you've never had an opportunity to be. That requires a care. And when they get stuck or they don't know what they're doing, instead of giving them answers, you ask questions because you're committed to their development. So that you really have to care about people to want to see them develop. There are CEOs who are really smart and just do everything. And what happens is the company grows to a certain milestone and those people become obsolete because he never guided and developed those people. And he has to fire them. He brings on new people who are supposed to already have it, and the company outgrows them and he has to throw them out and bring in a whole. So if you care about your people, they'll be with you for the entire ride.
You just validated my tagline: dare to lead with love and kindness first. So I
Very
love
good.
that. So let's talk about this idea of disruptive leadership. You have a disruptive leadership model. What
Right.
is it and how does it work?
So, uh, when I work with clients, the first thing I'm looking at is where are your blind spots, your mental barriers. We have to address that first because I'm coming in asking you, what would a breakthrough be for you? Some CEOs will say, "Well, I have this breakthrough. It's my legacy. I'd love to do it. It keeps me up at night every night." Except it's not the right time. The economy is not right. My people are not ready. There's a long list of reasons why you can't do it. And when the CEO peels back those blind spots, they then get to see that it's not the economy, it's not that their people are not, it's them saying, I'm not ready to do it. And the CEO is going to have to develop new skills and competencies. So one way to look at it is if you're a $50 million CEO and you want to get to 100 million, you need to become that $100 million CEO before you get there. Because I've seen CEOs who grow the company to 100 million, and the company is more than what their competencies can manage, and they shrink it back down. So you're all whatever your revenue milestone is, you're going to have to get there first, which means you're pulling your people along. So as I said earlier, um, not being able to uncover your blind spots so that you don't get derailed when chaos shows up, because that normally happens. And in breakthrough initiatives, you're going to deal with problems you've never seen. So how do you deal with something you've never dealt with in the past? And so that's getting back to the distinction of thinking and having thoughts and having a mindset that allows you to think through the uncertainty and really leverage your team, not do it in a silo. I'm the smart guy who has to have all the answers. You have a smart team. I know I use Steve Jobs to death, but he said we don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people and ask them what we should be doing. So really knowing how to leverage that. And if you look at many of the titans in the past, John D. Rockefeller Sr., Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, even Howard Hughes, they all had that same sort of mindset. They hired really talented people and leveraged them, people who were masters in a universe, whatever it was.
And to your point, the number of times I've seen people get hired within organizations and the hiring manager's so excited, oh, just wait till you meet Steve, he's awesome. Oh my goodness, he's awesome. And then 2 years later, people are like, oh my God, it's like, I hired Steve 2 years ago and he's not living up to the capacity I thought he had. And so, and again, that becomes the finger pointing. So again, this idea of being able to vet your mindset, because that's, I find that, I'm addicted to these kind of restaurant renovation shows like Bar Rescue and
Sure.
Gordon Ramsay and all this. And I love because I used to do that for a living. I used to go into hotels, but I
Oh,
realized
interesting.
very early on that you can't just fix somebody on a conceptual level, because as soon as crisis hits, they're going to revert back to their bad behavior.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so, what then becomes the check and balance as people are trying to make this change? What becomes the check and balance to make sure that I'm not moving backwards? I'm not falling into my old behaviors.
Sure.
How can we check ourselves?
So, perfect question. So, the way my work works is there I don't want people to be aware of blind spots. I don't want you to be aware of your past. My commitment is you have distinctions. And the best analogy is if you and I are walking down the beach and we have to get down this beach and we come to this sign that says the next 100 yards is filled with landmines. What do you want to do, Mark?
Run away?
Are you gonna say, "Hey, we're just, throw caution to the wind and run through the
No,
landmine"?
gosh, no.
No.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Then you get
So
heavily strategic about it. It's like, well, if we have to get to the other side, how are we going to get this to happen?
right, how do we get there? So if
Yeah.
I say, "Hey, Mark, I have thousands of hours in training for distinguishing mines in a minefield," it's very subtle. What you can actually see, what I have to be undisturbed, and not only can I see where they are, and I already see three, I can dismantle those mines and we can walk through. You just follow in my footsteps. Are you going with me?
Absolutely. And yeah, and of course the most ridiculous response would be, "Wait a minute, but I'm the manager. You have to follow me."
So so that is a great way. You asked, uh, what do people need? So people have past events like the guy who was in the mortgage industry that that event of him being in a car with older guys was a mine in his mind, and when he was in an environment where he didn't think he belonged, it went off, and he went to what allowed him to survive, so like a trigger, and he
Yeah.
starts making jokes, right? So everyone has minds in their mind. My job is to provide you with tools so you can distinguish and see your minds in your mind and unlearn them, be able to reverse engineer and unlearn them. And then, as you said, when you get into chaos, it may go off. And so now you have, before you didn't know about it. You were aware something in your past, and what the awareness does often is say, don't be that. And that's more suppressive and unhealthy. I want you to have the power of walking through that minefield, distinguishing it, dismantling it, and saying, okay, the mine went off. I see it. I'm not stuck with it. This is what I'm committed to. So the guy in a mortgage company said, I'm committed to closing this deal, and I have a strategy of asking questions. So this is real time. Like, imagine being on the football field. How do you deal with, there's a defender who wants to block you and you have the ball? Real time, how do you manage that instead of balling up and saying, don't hit me too hard? So
Mhm.
what my clients have is this distinction for the minds, and this in a choice now to say, this is what I'm committed to, and it allows them to move forward. And what you'll find over time, if you confront those minds, they either don't go off as much, or you even almost forget that over time that you ever had that mind. It's like, wow, I remember a year ago that used to bother me, and now it's unbelievable. It has zero impact on me.
Right.
So it's
Well,
not about being superhuman, but it's confronting the things that derailed human beings in our human paradigm. Sorry, go ahead.
no worries. This is really fascinating. I think this is a really good spot. If people are tuned in and listening to this and they go, oh my goodness, he's speaking to me, how can people get in touch with you, Ted, if they need to work with you?
Sure, you can find me on my site, turnaroundip.com. And IP is like intellectual property.
Gotcha. Excellent. Um, Uncertainty is one of those things that when people are making the change, how do managers, leaders, how do they manage the fear and uncertainty that comes with, I've never done this before and I don't know what the outcome's going to be?
Well, that's what we've been talking about here. So I had a client once, CEO, and smart guy, Ivy League educated. And when he was 5 years old, he knocked over a china cabinet. And what he was left with is, don't take risks, because you knock things over, you break them, and you do terrible things. Right. So he doesn't know that that's what has him hesitate in uncertainty, because it's, it, we get flashbacks. It's like we relive this moment of when I broke something, and I don't want to be the guy who breaks the company. So it's better not to do it. It's unbelievable how our past is being put into our future and making decisions. So it, you another way to look at the future is creating a future from the future. And it's a future you don't know how to do. And our
Mm,
founding fathers are a great example. We're declaring independence from Great Britain, and we've never run a country. We don't know how to do it. And we're going to, if we get caught, we'll be hung for treason. So we're putting our butts on the line, but we're creating this future that doesn't exist. We're creating this independent nation that we will run, and we're going to have to make it up as we go.
gives you goosebumps, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. When we come back, I'd like to talk about some pitfalls and cautionaries for the people who listen, who is like, oh, this sounds like a really great idea, and it becomes the policy of the month. It becomes short lived, it becomes harmful. So I'd like to talk about some of those pitfalls and cautionaries, and we'll get to that right after this.
When you're delivering an important speech to a huge audience, it's easy to lose your place or go way over time. Give yourself an advantage with the Pro Speaker Presentation Speech Timer app. No more checking your watch or calling for time. The Pro Speaker Presentation Speech Timer app keeps you on track with easy-to-see timers, even changing color for visual prompts during your speech. And you can set audio cues to practice, or set it to vibrate so you don't even have to look. Be the pro you know you are. Download the app at speakerpresentationtimer.com.
Welcome back. As you can tell, Ted and I are absolutely committed to serving businesses just like yours. So, if you'd like to explore how we could be of benefit to you, especially if you're planning something like a leadership retreat or you're part of a conference planning team, drop us a line. Our contact details are in the show notes. We'd love to explore how to work with you and make your event absolutely stellar. Ted, what do owners and managers and frontline leaders need to do now to overcome their own mindset limitations and beliefs? Because we've been talking about what they should be doing. I know that working with you, you're going to have some sort of a checkpoint for them to be able to check themselves. But in the meantime, if some people are tuning into this and going, you know what, they're right, I need to change how I'm thinking. What does that checkpoint look like for them?
How do I change? So, reading books can be helpful. It can help you explore other perspectives. But one of the things that is really helpful for leaders is in, if you're in your company, that person for whom you have not much affinity, you just don't like the way they think. That's the person you take out to lunch and you sit down and you get to know them as a human being. And what you will find is they are more human like you. You have way more in common than you think. And that person probably, most likely, has this untapped capacity, unmined talent that the organization isn't leveraging. And you're wondering why they are disengaged. Or as I said, they could be going through a divorce and be disengaged from that, right? So you
Sure.
might be a support structure, but ultimately, sitting down with people who you think you don't like, and you've made up this whole novel in your head about what kind of person they are, who they are, and why you're justified for not liking them. I don't like people who wear bow ties and yellow socks, and I know what kind of people they are. They drive this kind of car. Or they, uh, you know, the guy is too tall or he's too short. You have all kinds of reasons. Those are the people that you sit down with, and you really, if you ask questions to invalidate them, most likely you're going to come up with more reasons and proof of why you don't like them. But really get to know them as a human being, who they want to be, who they always wanted to be, and just take time to get to know them. And what that does for you is gives you new perspectives and helps you then better check yourself with other people.
I love that. As people consume this information, pitfalls and cautionaries, as they try to make a change. Obviously, again, we talked earlier on about this thing about becoming trustworthy, being being in an environment where people can trust you. Are there
Right.
any cautionaries and pitfalls we should be aware of as we try to change ourselves first?
Well, so one of the things that I see a major pitfall is when you're learning something that is going to support you in transformation, the pitfall is to make an attempt to understand it through that which you already understand. So now you're not learning anything new. You're in a way you're saving yourself from confusion and uncertainty by saying, "Oh, that's just like this. I already know this stuff." Um, or you try to take something from, well, I learned this other thing over here and I learned something over here and I'm going to just put it all together. My suggestion is that you master it before you start judging it, before you start making it just like this or adding things, because once you dilute it, it loses its power. And then you can say, see, that stuff doesn't work. And it would have me wonder, is there some underlying conversation you have about yourself about nothing can help you anyway? So, but you never, that's your secret that you never tell anyone. And so once you start thinking about how this is just like that, or I already know this, start to look at what's really underneath that has you sort of protect your identity from being disrupted, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. Your identity, your sense of who you are is possibly being disrupted, and people want to say, well, I'm okay, why should I change? I'm really great as I am. And no one's saying you're not. Well, what when you were 5 you were great, but you're no longer 5. So, becoming someone you've never been, and ultimately in my work, becoming someone you didn't know how to be, is really where the power is.
That's so powerful, Ted. That is extremely powerful.
Mm,
Do you
thank
have
you.
any last thoughts about what we've been talking about today?
Sure. So I'll I'll bring this my book and everything together.
Okay.
So we're talking about uh, providing people with competencies to better navigate uncertainty and chaos. Ultimately, we're talking about conflict resolution. And so, if the corporation could develop people in these competencies, people will take them home and be more effective in dealing with the conflicts with their spouse and their children. And what you will see is a significant drop in the divorce rate. If corporations could take on developing my people to be more effective in breakthrough initiatives so our company can be more innovative, have breakthrough growth, quantum leaps, and my people are less likely to be divorced. They're more likely to be engaged. And they'll have a great home life, and they'll come to work with a great home life, and they'll have a great work life, and they'll take that home and have a great home life. So it's this self-perpetuating circle of empowerment where people are actually getting what they want out of life, and sometimes even more than what they expected. So corporate social responsibility is where the corporation can provide people with the skills and competencies that make marriages work.
I love that because the spin-off ultimately is if we can help our employees, all our employees, not just our leaders, all our employees
Right,
build great relationships and sustain great relationships over the long
right,
haul, both personal
right.
and professional, it does nothing but spin off into a positive net result in our business. Lovely.
For the whole country, transforming the culture of the nation.
Amazing, eh?
Absolutely.
Ted, could you remind everybody one more time how they can get a hold of you?
Sure. My website is turnaroundip.com, and it's Turnaround Investment Partners. So Turnaround IP is for investment partners.
Lovely. Thank you. Ted, thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate you sharing your passion, your ideas with us today. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. This was a wonderful conversation. It was my
Hey,
pleasure to be here.
I hope to have you back on again when you write your next book.
I would love to.
Why
Absolutely.
don't you let me know if this was of value to you? As always, my offer stands. If you'd like 30 minutes of my time to brainstorm your business with you and your team, feel free to book yourself on my online calendar. The link is in the show notes. It's the one that's marked meetwith.markhaine.com. It would be my absolute honor to be of service to you and your team. And while you're at it, please leave a comment about this episode. Leave a review. Let me know your feedback. I'd love to understand, was this of value to you? And of course, if you haven't done so yet, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. That way you get notification when I bring you fresh new experts each and every week. Thank you again for joining me today. My name is Marc Haine. I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope you dare to be the exception. Bye for now.